And the elephant in the room, payment for ecosystem services. We can look at the issue of the carbon market, subsidies, incentives for conservation, community-based agreements. This is one of the areas over the years I've found the Caribbean in general lacking. There seems to be a disconnect between traditional economists and marine resource economists. We're somewhat seen as more theoretical. So things such as valuing ecosystems and putting a price on it, I don't think these things are not done, and it is resistant to that, despite all these beautiful policies making reference to payment for ecosystem services. Finally, scaling up climate change mitigation and adaptation as well as financing. All this is critical, start to move from start the process of decarbonizing in respect to fossil fuels, as well as incorporating climate resilience in development. And very important, risk insurance facility, given the predictions with respect to climate change, as well as strengthening social protection programs. All these things are critical if we're taking a holistic approach when it comes to managing marine biodiversity. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that insightful presentation and showing us that supporting fisheries and food security fosters sustainable growth and livelihoods. And I note that having a people-centered, holistic approach and inclusivity is the underlying theme for tonight's webinar, which is very important. And it was also interesting to learn that the challenges being faced by the fisheries sector in Antigua and Barbuda is common across the Caribbean as well, which is sad. But right, so moving along, for all participants listening, if you have any questions, now would be the time to place them in the chat. We would also like to give the opportunity to anyone who would like to ask any of the presenters yourselves after the moderated discussion. Then you can use the raise hand feature to the bottom of your screen and we will permit you to unmute yourself and ask directly. But from my end, I would like to, oftentimes we need to engage with communities, and that was highlighted in your presentation, Ian, as well as Bianca and Mark as well. We need to engage with communities during project implementation, for example, and we need to ensure that community engagement is inclusive. So what I would like to know is, what are the key barriers that communities often face in participating meaningfully in marine conservation, and how do you think they can be addressed? Feel free, any of the presenters. It's open to any one of you, or all three of you.
I'll defer to Bianca. Go ahead.
Okay, and okay, Bianca is good first.
Sure, no problem. There are a couple of things that come to mind, but in case of the CMOS project right now, what I'm actively engaged in, I'm going to go from the other side first. Where we're seeing success is in sort of being very transparent in how we are delivering the best practices and so for instance, we had a starting point, right? We had a couple of resources that had methods that we certainly could have just said, here are the methods and follow it this way. But what we decided to do in this case was to sort of run trial plots. And those trial plots were okay, here's what it says on paper. Let's do it in the water here, and let's engage you in seeing how it works, right? So one of the things that we are looking at shifting it from this monoline technique, which, like I said before, is using these stakes, oftentimes taken from the forest, and trying to implement for instance, introduce bamboo, which is actually what was used in the 80s. So creating these raft systems made out of bamboo, which is a much more sustainable material. And so we created it, and then we have the farmers who are actually providing the sea moss to go on these rafts. They're also saying, yes, okay, but remember our sea moss farm is a little bit in deeper water than this particular one in your plot here. So what's going to happen when, the wave action is higher? How do we look at the anchoring and so on? So that's one method that has increased the buy-in, right? In involving the farmers in the trialing, right? And not just saying, here's a method, right? Actually working together to sort of work things out. And then reaching to outside of the network here, looking at what are the success stories in Grenada, for instance, and what are the success stories in St. Vincent, and where else we're seeing sea moss being farmed in Jamaica. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. There are other things that have come to mind, but I realize I've talked a lot, so let me hand over to the other panelists.
From my perspective, one of the challenges that we face is that, for instance, more and more we find individuals less interested in actual participating in the governance process. They tend to, I don't know, leave the actual participation to whoever they elect, whether it be the head of a co-op or some other individuals. That has been challenging, but what we have done is try and incorporate having champions among the fishers to actually bring other individuals on board. All too often, fishers tend to listen to one another as opposed to an outsider, myself. So that has been one of the strategies we have actually used to get greater buy-in in terms of when it comes to co-management, when it comes to governance of the marine environment. We try and help develop champions to address any one of the cause. And also, once they start to participate, you also find that they develop a sense of ownership in the whole governance process. And with that, you get greater compliance. That has worked for us, particularly with the conch fishers, as well as research we have done with respect to sharks.
Right, thank you. We have a question in the chat directed to Mark Ram. So Mark, you mentioned mangrove depletion due to coastal development in Guyana. Are there any assessments on the impact of the mangrove depletion on Guyana's environment, or whether it has had any significant effect on the efficiency of coastal sea defense structures?
Thank you. So we've had currently there is the one of the project that basically looked at expanding the area that connects the shore. So this was creating, for example, an artificial island in one of the rivers. And for that particular project, they were required to clear some mangroves for that project. But there haven't been any large-scale study to assess the impacts that might have had. But apart from these coastal development projects that are happening, but may require larger areas to be cleared, there are efforts to conserve and restore mangroves. So that kind of creates a balance. If we can create that balance where we can have conservation and development, so areas where we can restore mangroves and areas where that we can use for development. I think if we can bridge that balance, obviously, that would be very good for Guyana, especially as we're on this trajectory pattern. But not all of the times we see that this balance is created. So there's no, to answer the question, there's been no study to assess or to investigate the impacts of these projects on biodiversity. For some of the projects, they may require an EIA to be done. So that's usually done before the project, and their monitoring that happens post-project. Looking at those EIAs, the Environmental Protection Agency can determine whether the projects have impacted the biodiversity, whether the levels have sustained, or whether it has declined.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, and that actually is connected to my next question, because oftentimes it's hard to find that balance between conservation and development. And as Ian mentioned in his presentation, urbanization is a critical threat to the fisheries sector, as well as to numerous other sectors. But how can Caribbean governments better integrate marine biodiversity conservation or marine biodiversity on a whole into national sustainable development planning? How can we find that balance?
For me, marine spatial planning is critical. All too often, well, marine spatial planning along with codification of the plans. You would have areas that are set aside for particular types of activity, whether it be ecotourism, and then maybe, for instance, a large investor come in and they want to do a major hotel. Marine spatial planning is one ways in which you can actually ensure, well, at least minimize user conflict and set aside critical habitats. The challenge that we have is as we develop, from where I sit, being in fisheries for 20 plus years, is that bit by bit, you know the saying, is it death by 1,000 cuts? I've seen that taking place over the years, where bit by bit, the coastal development bit by bit gradually erode critical habitats. And the only how we can do that is actually ensure that we maintain our marine protected areas, as well as better use of marine spatial planning, and ensure that these plans are actually codified so that it's not changed.
To that, I would just add that again, sort of back to back to what I was harping on before with the policy and laws and the sort of management frameworks that we have, that it's important for sustainable development that we consider our islands as a whole, right? We're small islands, so just looking at one small part of the coast, saying it's just one hotel, we have to look at the bigger picture of development on a whole. So I would just say the marine spatial planning and as the similar process that takes place sort of on a bigger scale in terms of your regular I'm losing my words here, but land use planning.
Yeah, I would also, I agree with my colleagues. I also think that we should adopt ecosystem-based management, where we focus on managing these ecosystems holistically. So that means, for example, a mangrove ecosystem with all of the biodiversity that it supports and the ecosystem services, rather than focus on maybe single species management. This type of management is more holistic, and it can ensure that we are preserving or we're conserving the ecosystem benefits while we are developing at the same time.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yes, a comment in the chat. Sometimes the very protected areas are a great source of economic interest for revenue. I see that Mark July's hand is up. You can go ahead and unmute and share.
Good night, everyone. So my question is to, I guess, the entire panel. Could you guys speak to the use of an extended producer responsibility, the EPR framework, when it comes to managing um, marine pollution? I know in the marine space pollution, whether it's from plastics, whatever what kind of debris, whatever there is. I know that's a big deal. And speaking on governance, two of the presenters spoke on extensively on governance using a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. The EPR framework basically is like a cradle to grave thing, and it incorporates the circular economy. I was wondering if in the respective territories has any steps been made in that direction to hold producers responsible for the products they put out into the market that ultimately lead to the pollution of the marine environment.
In terms of the circular economy, it's a fairly new approach. We have there's some use for it currently in the case of fisheries management in terms of managing, say for instance, waste from fish processing and reusing that for animal feed and other things. I think the challenge that we have a lot of times, much of the items that we use are actually imported. And even when simple thing as going back to the issue of recycling, that is problematic, for instance, from a standpoint of economies of scale, which makes it extremely difficult for particularly SIDS to deal with that issue. There are a number of programs. We've started looking at a number of programs, repurposing plastics, using it as aggregates. These are some of the ideas that we have, but the scale at which we're actually doing it, we haven't reached the point where you can actually scale up for it to be effective. I don't know if it's something you're going to have to look at a regional level to address that issue, but one can recognize the challenge. Even when I lived in Canada and they were doing recycling, they were shipping it to, the Asian countries because it just make economic sense for them, making it somebody else's problem. Other avenues you can look at is, the issue of banning of certain types of plastics. Those are things that we can actually look at. So we don't have to deal with the end of use issues.
Right. Thank you for your question, Mark. And probably one more question from me. So this year's theme, as I mentioned in my introduction earlier, this year's theme for International Day for Biological Diversity is harmony with nature and sustainable development. So I would like to know, what does harmony with nature look like in a marine context within your respective countries? Anyone free to share?
For me, harmony with nature, I think more of a collective action in terms of sustainability, greater stewardship of the marine environment. Those are things that actually pop out. And a recognition of the fact that we are a part of the ecosystem. All too often, we treat the ecosystem separate and apart from man. Without the ecosystem, we can't exist. So for me, harmony with nature means living find the right balance with the environment long term.
I also share the same view. I think for Guyana, it means that we were able to manage our rich biodiversity in such a way that it can be sustainable for future generation. At the same time, trying to promote our country's economic progress and maintaining our social well-being. So having, even though we're having the rapid trajectory of development, as I mentioned earlier, we must find a balance in such a way that we can conserve our biodiversity, while at the same time harnessing the economic benefits from development.
I think that harmony with nature in the context of most of our islands in St. Lucia, in the case of the sea moss industry, but just in general, is a framework where we increase protection of our ecosystems and species, and one where we also look at sustainability in relation to sort of self-reliance. The future is uncertain. The future could look something like COVID-19. We don't really know. And I think that it's important that we look at things like food security and sort of really focus on being independent as much as possible, especially in our small islands where we rely a lot on imports and so on. So I think building and working on our agricultural systems and resilience from natural disasters and other effects of climate change.
Yes, agreed. Agreed. I'd just like to open the floor to any more questions from the audience. Feel free to unmute yourself. Any more questions or opinions or comments? If there are no more questions, then I would like to thank you. Well, thank all the panelists for your insightful, presentations and for sharing your perspective on the various questions asked. Now I would like to pass it over to my colleague Timika Maxine, who will facilitate the webinar, a little webinar trivia that we've prepared for all participants.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So my name is Tumika, and I'm going to be conducting a little webinar trivia. So in the chat, we're also going to be using menti.com. So you can see the code and the website in the chat. So you can type that into your browser. And from there, we're going to be presenting. So once you are logged into the Menti site, we will present and you'll just follow along, select the correct answer for the trivia. And at the end, we will see who are the top 3 participants and go from there. So I'm going to start sharing now and let's have fun. So if you can still hear me, I'll give everybody a minute or so to join and then we'll begin. Okay, so we have 20 persons. You guys can still join up, and I'm going to begin the quiz now. Okay, so I hope everybody enjoyed that little trivia. So I see that the top 3 people were Sean, John, and Jessica, with Sean in the top. So congratulations, Sean. We have no physical prizes, so you have earned yourself bragging rights to the GYBN Caribbean group. And thank you to everyone that participated in this. I'll hand it back over to the GYBN team.
Right. Thank you, Timika, and thank you for facilitating that. And congrats to Sean. Right. I hope that was fun for everyone. I will now pass it over to my other colleague, Angelique, who will provide some brief details on GYBN's membership engagement and how, any interested persons can become a member of GYBN Caribbean. Angelique?
Yes, thank you. Good evening or night to everybody online. We once again welcome you all to GYBN, or the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and a big thank you to all for your participation tonight, and huge attendance number as well on our 4th Biodiversity Matters webinar live right now. And for those joining for the first time, we do invite you all to hop online and check out our social media pages. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, X or Twitter, and Facebook. Likewise, for those who haven't joined us yet, do join our team and register to GYBN. I'll be sending our social media links and registration form in the chat. And we'd love to have you all to join us for many great opportunities in advocating for the environment, and as well as represent the voice of Caribbean youths in preserving our biodiversity. Let me send this here now. There you go. And as well as our link tree to all of our social media pages. You can see the many activities that we have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. So everyone can go ahead and check out those links in the chat. Right. So this now marks the end of our webinar. So thank you once again to our panelists for these exceptionally informative presentations. We are so thankful for the incredible work being done across the Caribbean as usual. So on behalf of the GYBN Caribbean team, thank you, Mark, thank you, Bianca, thank you, Ian. I would also like to thank the events committee of GYBN Caribbean for putting together this webinar. And many thanks to our social media committee for their promotion efforts, especially on our social media pages. And as usual, along with the support from our steering committee members, Anthea, Tyrell, as well as our membership engagement committee. Lastly, thank you to all our participants for joining us. I know that it is Friday night and we are exhausted from the week, but many thanks for making time for this webinar. And I hope that it was as informative for you as it was for me. So have a good weekend, everyone, and see you at the next webinar. And once again, happy International Day for Biological Diversity.
Thank you. Good night.